My name is Ray Lockhart. I'm a commander in the United States Navy Intelligence Division. But to my family, I've always been the disappointment in uniform, the runaway, the one who left them behind. That's what they said in court anyway, over and over again. The courtroom was cold, not just in temperature, but in spirit. My mother sat on the front bench, dabbing her eyes like a grieving widow, though my father had passed nearly a year ago. My brother Nathan leaned forward with his hands clasped his wedding ring, conveniently turned inward to hide the affair I'd uncovered last Christmas. And my younger sister, Elise, well, she didn't even look at me. Not once. They claimed I abandoned them, that I had no right to our father's estate, that I hadn't called, hadn't written, hadn't even shown up to the funeral. Lies manufactured and rehearsed. But I sat still, composed, watching them act like the victims. Then the judge, a silver-haired woman with a sharp voice and sharper eyes, glanced down at the folder in front of her. She adjusted her glasses, cleared her throat. And then she said it. "Commander Lockhart, would you care to respond?" Just like that, the room shifted. My mother's hand froze mid-wipe. Nathan's jaw clenched. Elise finally turned her head. Because suddenly, I wasn't just the black sheep anymore. I was the storm they never saw coming. Before you hear the whole story behind that moment, if you've ever been abandoned, hurt by your own family, and still forced to smile through it, leave a comment. I'm not telling this to complain, but because, maybe somewhere, you've felt what I felt. Now, let me take you back to where it all truly began. I hadn't been back to the house in nearly 16 years, not for birthdays, not for holidays. And when the news of my father's death finally made its way to me through a clipped voicemail from an old neighbor, not my family, I knew better than to expect a welcome mat. Still, I came. In uniform. I arrived the morning of the funeral. The church lot was empty, except for a single maintenance truck. I walked up to the doors, pressed my hand against the cool metal handles. Locked. The funeral had ended hours earlier. The program online said 11 a.m., but when I checked with the cemetery director later, it had actually taken place at 7:30. Private. Quiet. No announcement. My name wasn't even on the obituary. I should have left then, but something kept me in town. The family house, my father's, land sat on 20 acres just outside Roanoke. Red clay fields. A rusting tractor out front. A porch swing that hadn't moved since I was 17. When I parked outside, I didn't even step out at first. I just sat in the rental, watching the shadows move behind the curtains. I wasn't sure who I expected to answer when I knocked. Elise did, still perfect, still manicured, still wearing too much lipstick for a day of mourning. "Oh," she said, blinking at me like I was a ghost. "Didn't expect you." I didn't smile. "I'm not here to fight." She crossed her arms. "That's not how Mom sees it." Before I could reply, our mother appeared in the doorway behind her. Evelyn Lockhart. Red suit, pearl necklace, not a hair out of place. "Well," she said coolly, "if it isn't the Patriot herself." "Why wasn't I told about the funeral?" I asked. She sighed. "You've made it pretty clear you didn't want to be part of this family." "I never said that," I replied. "No," she said. "You didn't have to." The conversation ended there. I wasn't invited in. I didn't push. But as I turned to leave, Evelyn called out, almost as an afterthought. "Oh, your father's will has already been read. Everything's in order." I paused. Was I mentioned? Her eyes flickered, just briefly. "Number, he didn't leave anything for you." That night, I sat in a cheap motel on the edge of town, staring at the ceiling fan spin above me. Something didn't feel right. My father and I weren't close, but we weren't strangers either. He used to write me letters during my first deployment, signed them with little sketches of eagles. He knew I wouldn't come home often, but he never made me feel guilty for serving. I remembered one Christmas when I shipped him a bottle of scotch and a handwritten note. He sent back a photo of himself holding it, grinning in front of the old fireplace. He wasn't perfect, but he wouldn't have cut me out completely. 2 days later, an envelope showed up at the motel. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of what looked like a will dated 3 months before his death. My name was there, listed as executor of the estate. Included was a note scribbled in blue ink. This is the version I saw him sign. Get a lawyer, M. I stared at the signature. It was real. I recognized the shaky loop in the L, the way he always curled the bottom of the K like a tail. My father had included me. Someone had changed that. The next day, I drove back to Norfolk, walked straight into JAG headquarters, and sat down with a legal advisor. She referred me to a civilian estate lawyer who specialized in will disputes. He looked through the documents in silence. Then he looked up at me. This, he said, is fraud. We filed the petition that afternoon. I didn't tell anyone in my family. Not yet. Let them sit in their illusion a little longer. Let them think they'd erased me clean. They'd find out soon enough. The truth is, they started erasing me long before the will. I didn't see it at first, not when I left home at 18, with a duffel bag and a Navy recruitment folder. Not when I graduated from officer candidate school and got my first overseas deployment. Not even when I missed Nathan's wedding because I was stationed in Bahrain during an emergency lockdown. They told everyone I didn't care, that I didn't even bother to send a gift. But I had. A check and a card. Elise cashed it. Never mentioned it again. My mother used to tell people I was in communications, like I worked for some vague office in D.C. She never told them I was in naval intelligence. Never mentioned the ribbons, the citations, the promotion to lieutenant commander at 31. It didn't fit her narrative that I'd abandoned them, that I'd rejected our family values for metals and machinery. When I made commander, I sent a photo to Dad. Just the two of us smiling at my commissioning ceremony. I don't know what he did with it, but I never saw it on the mantle, never heard a word about it. Not until months later, when I got a postcard from him with just 4 words. Still proud, still watching. I didn't know it then, but that would be the last time he wrote me anything. The fracture started earlier than I realized. I found out through discovery documents from our attorney. Elise had obtained a general power of attorney from my father while he was undergoing treatment ostensibly to help pay bills. In those final 6 months, all financial decisions went through her, including the hiring of a new attorney connected to her boyfriend's firm. That's when the updated version of the will appeared, the one without my name. They told the judge I hadn't visited once in 15 years. What they didn't say was that I showed up 4 summers ago and wasn't even let past the porch. Elise had answered the door, same as always, arms crossed, smile tight. "Mom's sleeping," she'd said. "She's not up for guests." I left a tin of cookies I'd baked in the barracks kitchen. I found out later she tossed them. I tried to call Dad when I heard about his diagnosis. No one answered. The voicemail was full. Then the line disconnected entirely. I asked a fellow officer to help me find a forwarding address. There wasn't one. At the time, I chalked it up to illness. Now I know better. They didn't just forget me. They actively buried me. The day I received the phone records, it became obvious. There were dozens of outgoing calls from my father to a number just a digit or 2 off from mine. Close enough to be mistaken. Except, it wasn't mine. Never had been. It was a fake number. Someone had changed it in his contacts. Someone who had access to his phone. His care, his trust. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with every letter he ever sent me spread across the floor. There weren't many, but each one felt like a tether proof that I had mattered. At least to him. One of them ended with a line I'd read 100 times but never fully felt until now. "Don't let anyone rewrite you, Ray. They'll try. Don't let them." He must have known. At least part of him. He must have felt the pressure, the manipulation, the silencing that crept in when his strength started to go. But he hadn't fought back. Not directly. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe that's why he left the original will in someone else's hands. Maybe that's why he wrote 2 copies official, 1 quiet. 1 for them. 1 for me. I wasn't going to let the fake one stand. I wasn't a ghost. I wasn't a shame. And I wasn't done. Not yet. By the time the court date arrived, the courtroom was packed. It wasn't just family, although they were there, of course. My mother sat nearest the front, flanked by Elise in a pale gray blazer and Nathan in a suit I knew he couldn't afford without the inheritance. A few family friends whispered in the pews behind them, clutching tissues as if preparing to mourn someone still living. They'd all bought the story. Ray the deserter. Ray the bitter daughter back to cause chaos. Ray who hadn't called, hadn't cared, hadn't come home. And then there was me. I wore my dress blues, not as a costume, not as a statement, but because truth deserves to walk in fully visible. The judge was late. Or maybe it just felt that way. I watched Elise whisper furiously to our attorney. I watched my mother glance over at me with thin-lipped disdain. She hadn't changed. She didn't need to. Her best manipulation had always been silence. When the bailiff finally called the room to order, the judge entered. Judge Karen Harlow, mid-60s, composed, and unlike anyone else in that room, completely uninterested in pretense. Opening statements were swift. My family's lawyer painted a picture of estrangement, a daughter who left, never looked back, and now showed up with paperwork and bitterness. A daughter who didn't attend her own father's funeral. A daughter who only cared about money. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood and began slowly, methodically. We presented the original will, the notarized version, dated 3 months before my father passed, signed in the presence of 2 Navy officers, both of whom submitted affidavits. My name was listed as executor. My inheritance, the land, the home, and his personal accounts. Next came the phone records. 42 missed calls from my father to a falsified number, then the text logs from my old phone. Unreturned messages, photos of gifts sent home. Return receipts from packages Elise never acknowledged. Then we submitted handwriting analysis, comparing the fake signature on the revised will to Elise's known documents. The curve of the L, the downward stroke of the K, a near match. And finally, the video. It was grainy, dated 6 weeks before he died. My father sat on the back porch in his old flannel, voice worn but steady. His hospice nurse had recorded him leaving instructions, just in case. I don't know if Ray's coming back, he said. But I want her to know this land, this house, it's hers. She built her own life, and I've never been more proud. The room went still. Even Elise flinched. Then came the moment. Judge Harlow flipped through the files silently for a full minute. Then she looked up, eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. "Commander Lockhart," she said, voice cutting through the air like steel on glass. "Would you care to respond?" It was the first time my family heard the word commander attached to my name. Nathan blinked, visibly confused. Elise's jaw tightened. My mother's eyes narrowed like the floor had just shifted beneath her heels. I stood. "My name is Ray Lockhart," I said, keeping my voice even. "I've served this country for 20 years. I've been deployed across oceans, led teams through hurricanes and hostilities. I missed birthdays. I missed holidays. Not because I didn't care, but because duty called louder than resentment." I turned toward the bench. My father knew that. He never punished me for it. He sent me letters, kept my pictures. He made arrangements legally sound one esto ensure I'd be part of his legacy. That will was his choice. The version you were given is not. I paused. And if you want to know why I didn't attend the funeral? I was told it was at 11. When I arrived, it was already over. The time had been changed without telling me. I didn't miss his funeral. I was kept from it. There was a beat of silence. Not dramatic, just heavy, full of things that could no longer be ignored. Judge Harlow folded her hands. "Thank you, Commander." With that, the room was dismissed for recess. Elise stood so fast her chair screeched against the floor. Nathan looked like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. My mother didn't move. She just stared at me like I'd stolen something. But I hadn't stolen anything. I'd reclaimed it. When court reconvened that afternoon, the tension in the room felt like a taut wire ready to snap. Judge Harlow didn't waste time. She reviewed the legal filings again, then turned her attention to the screen beside her, the paused frame of my father, eyes tired but still sharp, sitting on that porch swing, declaring his wishes with more clarity than any will could fake. "I have reviewed all evidence," she said, her tone measured but final. "The testimony, the records, and the original notarized will leave no room for doubt." She looked at Elise, then at our mother. The court finds the amended version invalid. Power of attorney was abused. Executor status reverts to Ray Lockhart. The estate-land, home, and accounts will be transferred accordingly. In addition, a separate inquiry regarding potential fraud and document tampering will be passed to the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. Elise paled. Nathan's face drained of color. And my mother, she stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous, she hissed. She abandoned us. He was vulnerable. Judge Harlow raised a hand. Mrs. Lockhart, sit down. The courtroom echoed with silence. For the first time, my family couldn't spin the truth. Outside, cameras waited. A few reporters had picked up on the story military officer wins court battle over contested will. I gave no statements, no interviews. I walked past the noise like it didn't belong to me. Back at the courthouse steps, Elise caught up with me. Her face was red, furious. You don't deserve any of this, she snapped. You left. You weren't here. I turned to her, quiet but firm. And whose fault is that? I asked. You changed numbers. You lied. You made sure I wouldn't know he was dying. Then you pretended I didn't exist. She flinched, but only for a second. I did what I had to, she muttered. No, I said. You did what was easy, and you thought no one would ever call you on it. Nathan didn't speak to me. He followed our mother to the car, helping her down the courthouse steps like she was the one who'd been wronged. I didn't stop them. Truth doesn't need to scream, it just needs to stand. That night, I returned to the property, the house where I used to race toy boats in the pond behind the barn. I walked the perimeter, boots sinking slightly into the clay my father spent decades tilling. The porch swing still creaked, the air still smelled of pine and soil. But something was different. I wasn't a visitor anymore. I belonged. Inside, I found a dusty box in the attic labeled R.L. Inside, my old science fair medals, my first Navy letter of acceptance, even a childhood drawing I'd made of the house, complete with stick figure versions of Mom, Dad, and me. He'd kept it all. I sat on the wooden floor for a long time, the silence no longer cold, just honest. They had tried to erase me. But my father? He never did. 6 months after the verdict, I stopped thinking of the house as something I had to reclaim. It wasn't about ownership anymore. It was about purpose. I converted the southern acreage into a transitional sanctuary for female veterans. Not a shelter, not a charity, a space to recalibrate. We called it Lockhart Groundsa, place for women like me who came back from service not broken but misread. Each week, I walked the perimeter trails with new residents. We built garden beds. We sat on that same porch swing where my father once read the paper every morning. We talked about grief that didn't make headlines, about leadership, about silence, and what it costs. I kept the house modest. No press, no fanfare. Just good work, quietly done. I never responded to Nathan's third email, or Elise's lawyer's request to open dialogue. I didn't feel anger anymore, just clarity. Some bridges don't need to be burned. They were never built right to begin with. But one foggy morning in October, I heard footsteps on the gravel path. It was a girl, maybe 10 or 11, freckles across her cheeks, a book clutched to her chest. You're Ray Lockhart? She asked. I nodded. I'm Ava, she said, voice barely above the breeze. My mom's Elise. I blinked. She held out an old photom in uniform, standing next to Dad on the day I made commander. She said you help people. Like, people who've been gone a long time. I studied her. There was no accusation in her tone. Just wonder. Maybe a bit of hope. Well, I said slowly, opening the screen door behind me. We help people ready to find their way back, even if the road's a little messy. She stepped inside without another word. And as the door clicked shut behind her, something shifted. I had spent years trying to prove I wasn't what they said, trying to claw back space in a family that never truly saw me. But maybe legacy wasn't about being remembered by name. Maybe it was about leaving behind something better than what you survived. And in that moment, with Ava sitting across from me at my father's old kitchen table, I realized I hadn't just won. I had rewritten the story.